New York Magazine talks about a moment when Dick Fuld, CEO of Lehman Brothers, was confronted by a half a dozen of Lehman's senior investment bankers. It was during the first year of the financial crisis back in 2008, back when the big banks were starting to hemorrhage money, but the rest of America hadn't caught on to their grift yet. But Lehman's investment bankers had a pretty good idea what was coming. After all, they were the ones who had dug the ground out from under us. They just couldn't be sure how big the financial sinkhole would be, or how many banks it would suck in, along with the rest of the American economy. To try to salvage Lehman Brothers before it went under with the other big five banks, investors went looking for executives to sacrifice to the streets, especially after Lehman suffered a second quarter loss of $2.8 billion, something that hadn't happened at Lehman Brothers in nearly 15 years. In their minds, someone had to be punished publicly. They weren't looking to fire Dick, not yet. They didn't know how big the collapse would be, and that they'd soon be looking for new jobs. They just wanted Dick's right-hand man and Lehman Lieutenant Joe Gregory. But Dick Fuld, sitting across the table from senior investment bankers, wouldn't back down. He rallied. "I've given you 14 years of earnings. I have one bad quarter. This is how you respond?" Dick Fuld was not about to apologize. 13 years later, 10 million foreclosed American households later, Dick Fuld is still rallying, and he is still unapologetic. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Lemense, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no duh on the internet and get to the facts.
This is part 2 in our 2-part series about charisma. In part 1, we discussed theories about early man and why charisma and storytelling might have been the real reason we dominated the planet. If you haven't heard that episode, you should definitely go back and give it a listen. On this episode, we'll discuss modern functional myths about charisma. We want to know that when we meet someone convincing and suave, we'll know if we found a Steve Jobs or just another gorilla. And we want to know, how can we become as charismatic and convincing as Jobs? To reach our persuasive heights, we have a few myths. Myths like, is charisma really just beauty and charm? Can we learn charisma? Can we teach it? And our final myth, do we even need charisma? Or would our society function better if we stopped voting and paying people based on popularity, and instead relied solely on performance metrics? We'll get to why we should teach charisma in high school instead of Latin. But first I want to talk to Joe about why Dick might have actually been justified thinking Lehman might bounce back.
So in our last episode, you told us about how Lehman Brothers was, 150, almost 160 years old as an organization. AIG wasn't that old, and the government bailed them out. And a bunch of other companies of the big five, a bunch of them gambled on these shady mortgage loans. Why didn't Lehman get bailed? How come? Well, actually, first off, why did they think they were collapse proof, and why weren't they bailed with the rest?
It would have been an educated guess that they were going to be bailed out too. I would have thought the same thing. AIG was a lot bigger, and so they had more real estate risk. But them going out of business would have a lot bigger wave ripple effect in Europe. So the government had to think of that as well. And Lehman didn't have as big a foothold there. But more importantly than that, Lehman, a lot of their mistakes were very self-inflicted. It was said that they didn't really have a good risk management system in place. Even after they get burned on things, they just seem to never learn from it. And through history, had repeatedly done this. So it was a tougher sell to the government.
Okay. When we talked about them having 9 lives, it's not like they accidentally had 9 lives. They kept taking risks that made them come near collapse before.
And the government wasn't happy. It said that they didn't have a risk management function button in the whole company. And also they would kind of move things from real estate to other investments around. And some would say kind of a Ponzi scheme like way.
Okay.
Borrow from here, give to there to keep the overall ship sailing.
So their risk management system kind of looked like a spouse that is like organizing which utilities get paid so they don't shut off the lights before the water kind of thing.
This woman, she has a great quote. She joined Lehman in 1999 as a manager. She said, "I found myself in an institution that didn't have much appetite whatsoever for risk management." That's pretty telling, isn't it?
When your own people say that, yeah.
Now, why didn't Dick change his directions? Well, why do you think he didn't do it?
I'm going to go with everyone on YouTube and everyone from the news. I'm going to say just pure arrogance.
I think you're onto something there. I think that's warm. That's warm, if not hot. This is one of the problems. He acted for a long time as a CEO and a president. Now, there's a reason the corporate structure, there's 2 different people. I think he became so insulated with yes people that no one was allowed, because he was so persuasive, charismatic, such a bulldog. He didn't have the right amount of pushback. He needed some people to tell him no on his own team, not the government.
Right. Can we dig into that just a tiny bit? If you are president of a company, what do you do?
You run the company. The CEO is making the bigger decisions, right?
Okay, so one arm is financial, the other one is decision making.
They work together. They make decisions together, but it's not a dictatorship.
So this guy became basically Caesar, like he was the emperor of Lehman Brothers.
And the balance is different in different companies, right? In some companies, the CEO pushes harder, the president pushes harder, right? Based on family or skill set, right?
I was going to say, not exactly the same positions, but we kind of learned that in our Iacocca and Ford episode is there's a hierarchy there and you can have disagreements. Sometimes creative disagreements lead to good things. They lead to, an argument, but that argument in itself is a decision-making and a winnowing and a process.
But let's face it, there's CEOs who are morons, and it's because their name's on the building. It's because they were born into
Right.
it. It's not because of where they went to school or their business prowess.
So Dick Fuld was in a chariot with a gold laurel around his head, beating his own drum, basically.
This is the same one we talked about there not being any risk management program. This is a great quote. "Leadership is about doing the right thing, and no one should go unchallenged when they are about to make a questionable decision."
That is a strong statement. That is, I mean, I know she's speaking directly about Lehman, but that is strong for any of the big 5, I would think.
Okay, let me go touch back on the separation between the chairman and the CEO is important to allow. Okay, so it's important to allow free airing of views among companies' management. There are chairmen who are also CEOs who are willing to listen, to ask questions, and to take on board's other people's views. But there's a bully mentality when people want to stand up and speak what's really on their minds. When there's that bully mentality, Joe, that's very, very dangerous.
So when we opened our first episode, we talked about if you have a very charismatic CEO, if you're heading toward success, they sail you toward success faster. If you are sailing toward success, that same, you say, bully CEO, they can tell everyone, hey, there's some rocks, steer toward that. That's what we're talking about. Without being challenged, without having a decision-making process involving multiple people, it seems to me that's what we end up getting is, Lehman aims for the rocks.
Now, when things start going bad, they start going very bad. Now, the press is down their throat. They're being exposed to have all these really bad money out there on this, that they've misrepresented to their investors, that their money's safe. Now, but this is what I imagine. I just taught this from my notes from doing the study from this. So Dick Fuld, he's trying to keep this boat going, right? He's trying to keep paddling out to profits. But all these people on his team, Joe, all their net worth is evaporating daily. Think how stressed they are. They're not just losing their job. They're not losing their 2-week pay. They're losing everything. They're losing their life savings. They thought they were multimillionaires on paper before the thing I said on paper. Now they're going to go below water because they're all invested in this company.
That's right. You mentioned that in the last episode that 50% of their income is from stocks in Lehman. And so they are chained to the oars, like we said before, golden chains, and the ship is starting to go down. So Fuld is yelling, paddle harder, and they're all feeling water around their ankles.
And their wives, kids in private schools.
Right.
It's got to be terrible.
Can you imagine watching all the other big 5 investment companies putting on the brakes and your CEO is the one saying paddle harder?
Yeah, and I can't imagine. I do not feel bad for investment bankers, okay?
No.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it would be hard to manage thousands of them who are losing their life savings.
Right. Wait until next episode. I will make you feel bad about investment bankers. We'll take one of the least trusted professions on earth, and I'll make you feel sympathy for them.
With a good narrative.
Okay, so do you want to talk about how these investment bankers who are chained to the oars, how they got their jobs?
Yes.
Okay. In our first charisma episode, Todd put in our episode notes something that we ended up using, which is the phrase that, life is a popularity contest, that even interviewing is you selling yourself. You go on a dating app, you're selling yourself. You go on a date itself. You and the person you are dating, your questions are all secretly checking boxes on a resume. Does this person want kids? Does this person, have finances in mind? Do they make good decisions? Everything is really just about, out interviewing our way through life. So let's start at the barest of bones. If we want to be charismatic, how do we ace every interview we're at? How do we have that warm smile, have that warm handshake, make people want to meet us, want to see us again? I am going to hearken back to a Yale study we have covered a couple of times. This was a Yale speech study. And I'm just going to read directly from a couple portions of it. We've talked about this in episodes before, so we're not going to dwell on it too long. But Yale did a study where they played recordings of 274 individuals. They played recordings of people trying to get hired to 274 experienced hiring managers and experienced recruiters and headhunters. These people listened to audio or read transcripts of the recordings, and these managers were asked to assess the candidates' professional qualities. They were asked, how much would you give them for starting salary? How much would you give them for signing bonus? What is their perceived social class? Meaning, before the actual interview, just by transcripts and audios, what socioeconomic background do you think these people came from? So in this big study that we've quoted before, the Yale study, devoid of any information about the candidate's actual qualifications, meaning they don't know if they worked as a dishwasher or if they were working for, Dick Fuld's company, if they were working for Lehman Brothers. They have no information about what they're technically capable of. The hiring managers judge the candidates from the higher social classes as more competent for the job. Meaning without any other information, just reading transcripts or listening to audios, they could gauge who was from a higher social class, who made more money, who came from a more wealthy background. And the more important part to me, they assigned the applicants from a higher social class more lucrative salaries and better signing bonuses than those from lower social classes. So something in that study too that popped out at me that we've talked about before, it only took like 8 seconds. So within 8 seconds, a hiring manager can usually spot what socioeconomic background you come from, just from your language and how you speak and how you comprehend, how you piece words together, inflections, vocal tones, things like that. They can tell how educated you are, what your social background is, how much money your family made. And within those 8 seconds, they will, if you're from a higher socioeconomic background, they will assign you more responsibilities and they will give you a better salary based on that.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
But we've studied this, so we know that there's tells.
There are.
And how you talk, and there's a way to train. I knew a guy who did this. He talked to me about this. He said even little things like teeth straight, braces.
Yep.
All these different things. And did they go to a junior college? And that's a big one.
Right.
You think this is funny that this was a Yale study?
Yes. I think
almost like a training
ironic.
for their...
Yeah. Like they're taking this study and they're being like, okay, everybody from Yale, this is how you tell who is the poor.
Who's an Ivy Leaguer? Who's one of us? I guess that's what I feel. This feels like, first of all, it feels unfair. And when you say they picked these people, what that means to me is they eliminated the people.
Right. If you want to, okay, so we're going to put this into context of charisma. Why are we talking about socioeconomic class on a charisma episode? It's because we are more apt to trust the information coming from an educated person from a wealthier background. We think their information is good because their education must be good, which is really just how charisma and the power element of charisma works in a nutshell. If you want to sound charismatic, you have to educate yourself. You don't necessarily have to go to Yale. This is not the podcast where we end up saying, all right, now everybody go apply to Yale. What we're saying is, if a charismatic representative of the people emerges in life, your Dr. Martin Luther King, your Nelson Mandela, your whoever, Gandhi, all these leaders that we hold up on a pedestal who championed the poor, they came from educated backgrounds. They may not have came from wealth. In fact, oftentimes they didn't. They were educated. They educated themselves. They oftentimes bootstrapped their way through college. They got the ability to speak. They got the knowledge. They trained their mind. It doesn't matter how you do it. Night classes, going through, international colleges that, accept cash. Whatever you do, go to Toastmasters, go to extracurriculars. If you don't train your mind, if you cannot speak to somebody else in a language that conveys competency, you will not be taken seriously, and you will not be as charismatic.
But on the flip side of that, Joe, it's 7 seconds you can get in the door.
Absolutely.
And that's great.
Yeah, if you can sound educated and competent for 7 seconds, you're golden. It's like the rodeo of the mind. You hold on. Now, there is a moral question here that I wanted to bring up with you. It may sound dishonest doing this, right? Like are you
like you're trying to be someone you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Be yourself. That's what really, those things you see, those posts.
Yeah.
They don't like you, fuck them, which I don't agree with, but.
Right. Yeah, the idea that you trying to sound more educated than you are, or trying to sound like you come from a different socioeconomic class than what you actually come from, is there a dishonesty to that? Are you being charismatic at the cost of morals? I can't answer that for myself. The only thing I can say that I believe, honestly, is that you being able to communicate on somebody else's level isn't dishonest. It just means you're using a language they will understand.
And to add to that, Joe, when I talk to a kid, not baby talk, but when I talk to a kid who's in elementary school, I have a different way of talking to them.
Yeah.
I lean down, I use words, I talk slower, and that's not trying to con them. It's just trying to connect with them.
Not me, man. I will tell an 8-year-old about socioeconomic class and Yale studies all day. I will use the exact same language.
You have no lever. You don't.
I think you're right, though. It's not that you are smarting yourself up or dumbing yourself down in your language. You are simply making your words more accessible. If you build a tapestry out of simple parts, it will be understandable to everybody. And that's when you are truly making your thoughts accessible to other people. That's not you being condescending or dishonest. That's you giving them a gift.
And they want you to fit in. They want you to be part of their club. They're not looking to eliminate you.
Yeah, totally. I won't speak for everybody. There are some companies that are racist or classist or ist something. But generally speaking, the people want to communicate with you on your level. They just need to understand the words you're saying and the way you're structuring them. Of course, they will assign you a salary based on your socioeconomic class, but education is really the thing that bridges the gap with that. And you don't have to have a Yale education. It doesn't have to come with that price tag. You can literally use online classes that colleges use, and you can, for a fraction of the price, get that same education. We basically want to start with the hard, possibly nearly impossible thing to fix. That was the, get educated. Do you want to know the 5 or 6 things we can do that will actually make us more charismatic minute by minute?
Yes, that I can use every day. That's easy. A nice, easy button.
Yes. We are aiming for, if not easy button, then at least things we can train ourselves to do in the mirror day by day. So number 1, and this to me is the easiest one to fix, and this comes from The Atlantic in an article called The Charisma Effect. That'll be in our links. First off, to be charismatic, you must sleep. Fatigue saps charisma.
Isn't that a common theme for success?
It is. I swear, we are going to have an episode just about sleep. That's not a joke. I mean, I may sound like I'm being glib.
No, and rest.
Yeah, we're going to talk about how to do it right, myths. I want to get into the science of different power naps and power cycles and delta and beta rhythms.
And the rest part, though, too, Joe, that these famous successful people that we think grind 18 hours a day and never sleep, I'll sleep when they're dead, are binge watching Netflix, are just zoning out doing nothing most of the time.
Right. One of our very first episode was about how cortisol works and how leaders have to rest, have to sleep and take breaks and take these long vacations. And yeah, it's wild, but it's true.
Time burglar activities.
Yeah, you have to get rid of cortisol. So according to this article, researchers asked students to give a speech after waking half of them every hour overnight. Viewers gave sleep-deprived speakers low marks on their charisma. Now here's the funny part. They also rated speakers less charismatic if they themselves had been sleep-deprived. So if your audience is sleepy and haven't rested, they will think you're less charismatic.
Let's take the sleepy out. Let's say exhausted.
Exhausted. Okay, yeah.
Let's talk in real time. That's baby talk.
I want to... no, we're doing child talk the rest of this episode. Now, here's another one. A little bit of mystery may boost your charisma. They mentioned in the study that when a CEO's success was attributed to intangible factors, in quotes, like keen insight and vision, rather than effort and long hours, they were rated as more charismatic. So if you are the boss of a company and somebody asks, how did you figure this out? How are you successful? If you say long hours, lots of work, and talking to my team, you'll be seen as less charismatic than somebody that says, vision or insight or something vague.
Magic beans, yeah.
Yeah, magic beans. Of course, we all know taller people are seen as more charismatic by subordinates.
George Washington.
Right. Abe Lincoln, stovepipe hat. You can't control how tall you are, but you can always buy slightly taller shoes. That one at least is a little bit in our control, not as much as these other things.
And posture and voice, eye contact.
Yeah. Here is the one that was a shocker to me, and I like sharing this. This has been, for me, the fact of the week. Subjects with speedy answers to general knowledge questions were considered quick-witted, funny, and charismatic by friends. In fact, mental speed was a stronger contributing factor to charisma than IQ or personality.
Yeah, being sharp is attractive.
Right, but
quick-wit, humorous.
Not just sharp, but speedy in their sharpness. And it doesn't even have to be, like they said, IQ wasn't a part of this. So it's like you don't have to know how, nuclear physics works. You just have to have generally the right answer quickest.
I noticed that. My friends you don't have to tell them the whole thing. You start the story and they're already done, moved on. It's great.
Right.
You don't have to dumb it down for them. You just shoot it at them and they got it.
Right. I'm going to call this the Tony Stark effect, because in the Iron Man movies, that is all of Robert Downey Jr.'s charm. His whole character is built around the charisma of fast wit. Now, mental quickness may elude you. You may not consider yourself to be speedy mentally, but you can teach yourself that. This comes from the article. When researchers trained middle managers and MBA students for 30 to 90 hours in charismatic tactics, using metaphors and gestures, they found that charisma improved. So master these tactics, and people will basically follow you anywhere. You don't have to have the solution. You just have to quickly know what's going on. It's not like you'll be sitting in a boardroom and somebody will say, how do we solve the company's drain? We're losing talent. Quick, somebody solve the problem that people are being hired away. You don't have to immediately pipe up and say, offer stronger benefits packages and, include more aggressive training systems. You don't have to have that complex of an answer. You just have to say, okay, let's start with what our people want.
Or this is what I did when I was at Citibank.
Yeah.
You're on it.
Right. You have an answer. You don't. And they said in this study, like I said, subject with speedy answers to, quote, general knowledge questions were considered quick-witted. So again, if it is just the mostly right answer in a general sense, you will be considered quick-witted. Now, there is an important part in there. I put this in bold, and it's written in large in our doc, using metaphors and gestures. When we watched that clip last episode of Dick Fuld in his prime, basically, 2007, 1 year before the crash, he was at his most charismatic. He was, sitting up in a plush leather chair, a panel of people meeting about Asian companies. And he was the most charismatic and the most sort of like at his control, at his height. He used a lot of metaphors and gestures. Physically, he was gesturing with open hands, held wide. He was using metaphors to describe things. Why metaphors? One of the pieces of advice Todd gave me, and I know you got this from somebody else. It's sort of an old metaphor, an old colloquialism. When talking about tackling a very large project, you said, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I got that from Todd. I had never heard of that before. A lot of your wisdom and advice comes in the form of these very short, easy to understand metaphors. Why do you use those?
It comes off as taking it off as being lectury or telly, right? Like I'm telling you what to do. And a lot of them I got from reading just years and years of nonfiction, reading books and audiobooks. Because I'm guessing in that the people who write those are higher social class. And they use a lot of those.
Okay. What you said about not lecturing people. When we talk about how I go wrong with charisma and where you get it right. The way I get charisma wrong, I do lecture people. I tell people about the studies we've been covering and what colleges they came from.
You're a fixer. Nobody likes a fixer.
Yeah, nobody likes a fixer. What they do like is somebody who quickly, who has that rapidity and the speed that we associate with charisma, but they have an easy metaphor that will simplify the problem. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I imagine an elephant being eaten. That is a very, very powerful, simple, easy metaphor. And we talked in part 1 about how good stories, hijack the brain. We talked about the kinesthetic cycle, where if you tell somebody that they're seeing something, smelling something, hearing something, their brain starts to access those systems. And it leads to a storyteller's hypnosis of sorts. Metaphors do this in a very simple, easy to understand way. You build a reference for complex subjects, and it implies a lesson, and it brings sensory information together. When Todd says, if I could be talking about literally anything, any problem I have that seems vast and big and huge and too hard to deal with, Todd using that metaphor, it's quick, it makes him seem charismatic, and it is the right answer. It fits so many different circumstances. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It could be me talking about finances. It could be me talking about writing a book and that I need to do it one paragraph at a time. It could be building a car, one bolt or lug nut at a time. So Todd having metaphors in his back pocket means it comes out quick, it is easy to understand, and it comes out as good wisdom, not lecturing. Here's a couple ones that leaders use. CEOs use these, and I guarantee Dick Fuld has used every single one of these. They're so tropey or catchy or common. Leaders use metaphors like calling their employees team or troops. I've heard CEOs, like the CEO of, Uber, called himself the head incubator. I've heard CEOs call themselves gardeners. I've heard companies. Here's my favorite one. Disney, instead of calling its grunts, its simple team members, they call them cast members.
Oh boy!
How beautiful is that?
Yeah, that's great. Like you're an actor and actress.
Right.
You're not picking up cigarette butts and gum, cleaning toilets.
Right. Here are some really complex metaphors, ones that leaders have used that are, when you dig below the surface, they're really complicated. Like, if you're going to become a master of metaphors because you want to be a charismatic leader, start with those simple ones we mentioned. Don't go with these. Lehman claimed that they were temporarily selling toxic assets to banks in the Cayman Islands. I'm going to say that again, just because I want you to tell me what you think they mean. Temporarily selling toxic assets to banks in the Cayman Islands.
I don't know.
They were putting money in the Cayman Islands.
Oh, okay.
Nobody
Toxic.
sells an asset to the Cayman Islands.
It's just passing through, right?
Right, yeah. They're offloading some assets. No, that's supervillain speak for we're moving money offshore so the government won't touch it. So
Supervillain, the cape and everything.
Yeah. So if you want to be a charismatic leader, learn metaphors and gestures. To be a charismatic friend, learn to use simple metaphors like Todd does. If you want to be a charismatic CEO, refer to your employees as teams or troops or cast members. If you want to be a supervillain CEO, talk about selling toxic assets to banks in the Caymans. Now, I'm just going to mention very quickly, we're not going to get too far into this because we've started covering it already. We just want to give everybody sort of a roadmap to charismatic leadership. There's a Forbes article I found called "What is Leadership Storytelling?" Part of this is, okay, so it's a little bit of an old article, but leadership storytelling is effectively something that I've heard Todd do. Do you have any stories that sales leaders have told?
I got a million of them, but I'll give you one.
Okay.
Dead of winter. Working at a car dealership, I was in the finance office, so I do all the paperwork when you buy a car. and it was a blizzard here in Portland, Oregon, and that is rare. And everyone was thinking about going home. No customers are going to come in. We're wasting our time. We're all straight commission. We're sitting there for not even minimum wage, and it's not safe. The general manager came out, and he saw this low morale, and he sat down, and he said, I used to work here 10 years ago as a salesperson, just like you. He gathered the sales team around, the fireside chat. He said, I was sitting there looking out the window. We had a blizzard that was twice as bad as this, and nobody was coming in. Sales manager went home. The finance manager went home. All the mechanics went home. And then all of a sudden, this Bronco smashed into the side of the building. I went out there. I pulled him out of the car. I sold him 2 cars, and I made $2,000 that day. And I was like shaking my head. It perked morale, Joe. It worked.
Yeah.
Everybody worked that day expecting the goddamn car to come smash.
Right. It raised expectations. Your story, when you started that story, started with sensory information. It's snowing, it's cold, it physically places us. And then his story, repeating what's happening and then making them expect something in business. That is exactly the sort of tribal storytelling that makes people remember they're under a banner, they're being grouped together with the tribe, and B, here's something you should expect. Leadership storytelling is powerful. It primes people in a way that facts and figures don't. We have had so many episodes where we have debunked intelligence as being the thing in life that gets you ahead, that gets you, paid eventually. Good looks, talent from a young age. Honestly, I'm starting to think that charisma and social conscientiousness would be the 2 skills we absolutely should teach in class.
Oh, absolutely. And we're getting to a point now, I have a lot of friends who are engineers, Intel. And now when they go to interviews now, they're learning 2 things, Joe. A big one is called soft skills.
Yes.
And then the other one is to not be too technical. Because if you're too technical, everyone knows you're an asshole and nobody wants to work with you. You lack all charisma.
Right. We are getting further away from the age where technical skills, like people will put up with, you'll be hired simply because you are technically proficient. We're now getting into a world where everybody works on a team all the time, no matter what their technical skills are. You need to have charisma to do that.
And this is going to change your ceiling. Right? So people who are already successful are going to have a different soft skills.
When we talk about people with soft skills, these charismatic people, something charismatic people will do is they will know when to say an apology. They will know when to mea culpa. That's something that the Prime Minister of Canada, there are so many videos of him apologizing. Here in America, we think it's a joke, but Canadian Prime Ministers apologizing is like, that's seen as charismatic. That is seen as, we'll get into another episode in the future. We're currently writing one about how the ability to show guilt shows that somebody has social conscientiousness, that it makes them more trustworthy by far.
Yeah, it humanizes them as they had all the answers. And you also get your arm around them like, it's okay. We'll get better. We'll get through this.
Right. We want a leader who can show guilt. I think, personally, like pet theory here, Dick Fuld, the reason why nobody stood next to him, why he was labeled the villain, is because he never showed guilt. In fact, if you go through our past episodes, all these people who we hold up and say this is a villain in their field, they seem incapable of guilt. Did Dick Fuld eventually see the light, is the question I'm asking.
Dick is incapable of. His ego's too big. He's too insulated. He's too wealthy. And we haven't really touched on that. Yeah, he did run Lemense to the ground, but he didn't walk away broke himself. If he would have just stepped up and said, I screwed up, I lost your people's money, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what a lot of the CEOs from the other big 5 banks responsible for the crash, we don't know all of their names. At least we don't remember them because they said sorry.
I always think about this on a sports analogy with the steroid scandal. The athletes that came forward and said, I did it, I cheated, I'm sorry. Everyone forgave them. It's the ones that said, I never did, who are still banned from baseball.
Right.
The ones that, it was so obvious, everyone already knew, they're already busted, but they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't say it.
It almost reminds me of like the Maury Povich show, where they're like, I never did, and we're like, and the test results show.
Dick needed to listen to somebody. He needed someone in his circle. He just needs a PR person. There's a time that you just got to clean up your messes, and he just never did. It's not that he just didn't apologize. He still kept defending his actions, even when it was all the way over. Even when there was a funeral, he kept saying, I did the right thing.
He's like, this ship needed to be in the rocks. This ship needed to be part of the rocks, damn it.
I'm just going to read this short thing from his congressional testimony. This is from October in 2008. This is Dick Fuld. My employees, my shareholders, my clients have taken a huge amount of pain. And again, not that anybody on this committee cares about this, but I wake up every single night thinking, what could I have done differently? What could I have said? What should I have done? And I have searched myself every single night. And I come back to this. At the time I made those decisions, I made those decisions with information I had. I can look at you and say, this is a pain that will stay with me for the rest of my life, regardless of what comes out of this committee, and regardless of what the record book will say about it when it's finally written. It's like this pity party. I feel bad. I'm losing sleep. What about losing everybody's effing money?
The phrase that he starts with, not that anyone on this committee cares about this, but what?
That's like a teenager. You don't even care.
Yeah. Okay, I was thinking
your
like drama club. Yeah, that is so wild. He is really hyper focused on like what his employees lost and what he's being held accountable for. He does not give two shits about crashing the American or the world economy.
Now, after that, 2 years later, that was September 2008, 2010. Okay, he softened this blade a little bit. This is another quote. This is Dick Fuld. In retrospect, there's no question we made some poorly timed business decisions and investments, but we addressed those mistakes and got ourselves back to a strong equity position. So again, he's still...
This is 2 years after the crash, a strong equity position. His company is on fire behind him, and he's saying that.
So then he made a big thing that he lost $150 million of his own money on this.
Okay.
Whoa me.
So he's broke after that, right? 150?
He still walked away with $350 million. And that's the crime here. Explain that to me.
Okay. I don't feel so bad about him not coming back from this. So did he at least... I need apology somewhere. I need to know he at least knows that he lost money, that it was his doing. If not, if he won't cop to the world crashing, can he at least cop to the company crashing?
Dick Fuld, October 2008. I'm not proud of the fact that I lost that much money, but it does show that the system, our compensation system, did work.
What an asshole. Our compensation system, meaning their golden parachutes, their 25,000 employees, or at least maybe his executives, walked away okay.
Well, this is the thing. The only thing that I saw that really dug him up and got him, stabbed him in the stomach, stabbed him in the heart, was when he actually had to fire Gregory, his number two. And he had to do that because they didn't want to fire him because it would for the company, it would look bad if they fired him. So they fired number two, threw him to the wolves because they didn't know that they're going to get bailed out yet. That was a hard thing for him. And I don't think it was because of his buddy or because of his loyalty. I think it was because he was so power hungry. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, period.
His lieutenant is gone.
It's his lieutenant, though, you know.
Right. Okay. After hearing those, I don't like to end an episode this angry. Like, I'm not an angry person in general, but hearing Dick Fuld be fully unapologetic, this man who's walking away with $250 million. Okay, well, I guess the question is, do we need Dick? Like we started all of this, both charisma episodes, with the question in mind. We want charisma personally, but do we need the sea captain? Do we need the Dick at the front of the ship pounding the drum?
Let me make you a little bit madder.
Okay.
When the shit was, and I watched countless news programs about this. When the shit was really hitting the fan, they were showing his mansions. And his one in the Hamptons was what was cracking me up, because the news people were saying, well, you got to understand that and this is a house that he owns outright, you know. You got to understand that in the Hamptons, this is a very modest house. It was a fuck castle.
God dang it.
It looked like something you couldn't even imagine. Like Saddam Hussein's palaces, you know, like, oh, this is very modest. Like, he has to live there?
Right. Okay. Well, okay, so I'm changing my question. How do we get rid of Dick and all charisma? How do we
replace him with AI, right?
Well, okay, yeah, that's the question. Do we need to be more careful and only allow Steve Jobses to lead our companies? Or is there, are we eventually going to get rid of all Dick Fulds and only have artificial intelligence? So here is, I'm going to read from, this is a Sloan Review article. This comes from MIT.edu. It's called Why Good Leaders Don't Need Charisma. I hope that doesn't spoil my answer too badly. But they talk about in this article about how they went through and they studied 6 out of 18. Okay, so this is Germany's most recent winners of a title Manager of the Year. Of course, Germany would have a contest / award Manager of the Year. That's weird in itself, I guess. But they used them as a metric. This study looked at them and they were like, you know, okay, here's all the best managers of Germany. How many of these people are actually charismatic? How many of them were responsible for huge missteps? So they found out that 6 out of 18 had almost crippled their own company. So when we talk about Dick Fuld crashing his ship into the rocks and everyone following him, 6 out of 18 who won Manager of the Year crashed their ship.
30% of failures are
just the captain at the tiller spinning the wheel and saying, let's head over there, and then just the sound of ship breaking. This includes Daimler's disastrous acquisition of Chrysler. There's also CEO. I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically their simple answer is we don't need charismatic CEOs. In fact, they went through and studied, so comparing the quote-unquote managers of the year, who, a fraction of them outright ruined their company that year. If you instead look at 100-year-old European corporations, the longest living ones, the Lemense of Europe, basically, they wanted to look at these high-performance, long-living companies. What kind of leaders do they have? And they found, by studying them, high-performing companies often did not have charismatic leaders. In fact, they were considered less than average charismatic, especially compared to lower-performing companies. I'm going to quote from the article here because I think they really put it well. Quote, "The problem with charismatic leaders is that exceptional powers of persuasion make it easy for them to overcome resistance and opposition to their chosen course of action. If your company is heading in the right direction, a charismatic leader will get you there faster. Unfortunately, if you're heading in the wrong direction, charismatic leaders will get you there faster." If they had achieved enduring success, they did something instead of being charismatic and bold like Dick Fuld, saying, let's swim out toward that money. Let's aim for that, that big pocket of cash out there on the mortgage horizon. The most successful companies had uncharismatic leaders who listened to people and relied on old-fashioned industry expertise. So like you said, somebody who knows their job and knows the people's jobs around them. And they did something with that information called intelligent conservatism. This means that they had in-depth knowledge of the organization, and they were cautious with it. They took risks, but they were overall, on the whole, conservative and risk averse. And they only took risks once the people around them were also confident in those risks. So instead of Dick Fuld saying, let's take this big, bold, risky move and almost crush the company over and over, these people asked a lot of questions and consulted and deliberated. They did the boring, annoying, take up your time and burn meetings thing, and they consulted everybody.
Doesn't that seem like the companies that 100-year-old, the Lemense, these European companies you speak of, wouldn't that be who they'd be after? These giants of industries want to turn the boat slow anyways.
Yeah.
They think that they would value conservatism, not a huge risk taker, not a huge charismatic.
Well, one of the problems we have here in America is we hold up Wolf of Wall Street, and we hold up these very bombastic Elon Musks. We hold up Jeff Bezos. We idolize people who are radical and fast and clever and like we said about charisma.
Innovators, yeah.
Charismatic leaders. Like, charisma is oftentimes based on how quickly you have the answer. But business runs better when these people take slow, deliberate actions and ask a lot of questions and take their time. That's why charisma might actually be business poison. In fact, this study from this article says, quote, in long-lived corporations, 97% of CEOs were promoted from within. They took somebody who was from their own industry, promoted them up, instead of reaching out and getting a fast-talking, charismatic, rah-rah, charismatic CEO. Instead, they just found somebody who, like we talked about with the Iacocca episode, Iacocca was an engineer turned salesman because he knew everything about everything on the way up. That's how you run a business. I'm going to give you one last quote from this article that I thought was really good. Again, this is from the sloanreview.mit.edu. Why good leaders don't need charisma. Quote, we don't mean to imply that charisma is a calamity. A leader with a gift for being the center of attention can still have a very productive career. However, such a CEO is more likely to succeed if he or she spends more time learning and listening than cheerleading. Can we crush our hopes just a little bit more back down by talking about Dick Fuld trying to reemerge into the business life, into the public again?
Well, he's been on some lists I'm going to share with you later, and these are lists you don't want to be on.
Okay.
But this is 7 years after the collapse, and this is I'm going to paraphrase. This is a great article. This is in our show notes. It's from CNBC. Fuld's speech didn't even attempt to show any empathy for the 28,000 people who lost their jobs and money pretty much overnight. In his speech, he referred to Lehman employees as my people, kind of like they were possessions, indentured servants.
His rowers.
His troops, right?
Right.
He repeatedly bragged about the great institute he built at Lehman, but he refused to recognize where the culture failed. Once again, Dick Fuld doesn't look in the mirror. If you listen closely to Fuld's speech, what you'll reportedly hear is how great Lehman Brothers was under his leadership and how he developed a culture that was the premier of Wall Street. The real success of the firm, Lehman Brothers, in my view, was our culture, Fuld said. Minutes later, he continued and said, as one of the great investment banking houses on Wall Street, he's still delusional.
He thinks even though Lehman Brothers has collapsed, they built something amazing.
7 years later. Now, I challenge you, and I did this. I went all through the internet looking for they have a list of the worst musicians of all time, the worst the worst athletes of all time, the worst contracts, the biggest bust. We'll have the worst American CEOs of all time.
God.
And he was number one on all of them. And this was the best quote I heard. And this is from CNBC, and they ranked him the worst American CEO of all time. And he beat some real doozies. There were some bad ones in there too. He was by far number one. And this is what it says. Dick Fuld was belligerent and unrepentant his whole life. Even Ponzi scheme Bernie Madoff, Joe, he at least said he was sorry.
What's the difference between Bernie Madoff and Dick Fuld? Bernie Madoff did time.
In the civilized world, we overvalue charisma. We worship CEOs and entrepreneurs and motivational speakers who can rally the troops. And according to Yale, we hire people based on their ability to speak and fit into our corporate culture more than we hire them for their ability to move numbers around a spreadsheet. We'd like to think we're past our primitive tribal days of doing business. We're probably not going to war with clubs when Wall Street opens on Monday. And most companies have software helping them make their big, risky financial decisions. Yet we still gravitate toward the Steve Jobs and Dick Fulds. Lehman followed a charismatic tribal leader who was literally called the gorilla, who talked about eating the competition's heart and ate ribs for breakfast. As we evolve past blindly following charismatic CEOs, we can still utilize charisma in our own lives. Remember that charisma is a combination of power and warmth. Charisma is quick and witty, which requires good sleep and self-care. Charisma is at its most powerful when it's coupled with good storytelling and strong metaphors. But most importantly, good leadership comes from in-depth knowledge of your field, good listening skills, and the ability to network and connect with other people. In short, if you want to topple the 800-pound gorilla, don't match him in aggression. True charisma isn't persuasiveness. It's getting your tribe to rally behind your story and making the tribe richer, while we leave the gorilla with a temper problem alone to starve on his own. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where you can find research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.